Hey everybody, Steve here, welcome back. So we are here with our first comparison video trying to find a worthy successor to Finale. Now I did make a video before this one explaining what this series is all about, and I would recommend watching that first. But in a nutshell, Finale has officially kicked the bucket and we're here to find a replacement both in terms of functionality and adaptability. Now, in saying all that, I'm not trying to insinuate that Finale is in any way the best program for music notation. That's just not the case. And besides, the best program for you is always the one you know how to use the best. That's just always what it comes down to. But there is a large portion of the industry that has been using Finale for a really long time. And now a lot of them, myself included, are being forced to pick an alternative. And that's what this series is really all about. So we're going to start with the first alternative I identified, which is MuseScore. So the reason I picked MuseScore first was, full disclosure, I have used it a little bit in the past. I do have a few clients and collaborators who are fond of it and have told me some really nice things about it, but I'm in no way going to give it any kind of preferential treatment. In fact, the few times that I have had to use it, I didn't really like it, so this whole thing has been pretty eye-opening for me so far. Another thing I wanted to mention is I'm just here today to talk about the MuseScore software itself and not really about Muse Group, the company that owns it. We'll get to Muse Group another day. There have been some concerns in the industry about some of their business practices, specifically concerning a lot of the acquisitions they've made over the years, MuseScore being one of them. But I wanted to come at this with an open mind and give the program itself a fair shake, regardless of whatever controversies might exist around its parent company. All right, so with all that out of the way, let's get into it. So the first thing I noticed that I liked was just how simple the interface was when you start up. You can see I got my 3 different tasks I made for myself for all these programs right here. Everything looks great, really simplistic interface. Really appreciate that. Oh, and just a little bit of a heads up, throughout this video you're going to see me bounce around a little bit between the light mode and the dark mode. I wanted to try both and see which one I liked. I think I prefer the dark, but they both look pretty good. So as I mentioned in my last video, I gave myself 3 separate tasks to do in each of these programs. The first one was just a simple 32-bar jazz chart, AABA form. I chose John Scofield's wonderful song, We, to do this. And the idea was I was going to try to do it without consulting the internet and see how easy it would be for me to figure out the interface. Now again, I had a little bit of a head start on MuseScore, so I made extra sure not to, try to use my memory. I tried to do everything just based on, what I was seeing with my eyes. And there was only one time I needed to look something up, and I will explain that in a minute. But yeah, here it is. So it turned out pretty great, I think. I really love the font that they have. It looks really clean. I want to say I like it almost better than the Finale default font, which I know they've changed over the years, but this is just really legible, really clear. It was surprisingly easy to throw together. It took me about 15 minutes, just over that, to do the entire thing, having never done it before. So not bad for a first start, I don't think. One of the very first things I noticed using MuseScore here was something that I really, really liked, which is this kind of auto formatting, which kind of keeps things relatively, on one page and in some kind of order while you, maybe make changes to the overall format. That's a lot different than Finale, and that I know there are options in Finale to kind of make that a thing, but by default, that's a really great place to start when you're trying to whip together a quick little chart. Now again, I'm pretty new to this program. I've only spent maybe a total of about an hour doing all 3 tasks, but the one maybe biggest difference I've noticed from Finale is there's less emphasis on individual tools for every job. Like you don't have a chord tool and a this and that tool, for every little thing you want to do, and more about sort of individual inputs and also kind of selecting measures. I do really like this idea of kind of dragging articulations and different additions to the score, as opposed to like Finale's version of kind of selecting and adding them. I think that's kind of interesting. Another little detail I really appreciated was it actually gives you the names of each articulation that you use, which we should all know when you're arranging, but it's just nice to have kind of a clarification of what you're trying to do. Overall, I gotta say I was pleasantly surprised. As I expected, the more I kind of worked on things, the more it started to make sense, which is exactly what you want from a user interface. You don't want to be, struggling to find simple things. You want the logic to kind of compile as you go. So on to the cons. There's a couple little things. and I'm sure there's an easier way to do this, but I found the chord entry a little awkward. There is a shortcut for it to like throw in a chord if you wanted to do that. This shortcut is Control K by default, which is a little bit of a jump on the keyboard. I found that a little bit awkward. I know you can remap that, which is something I would definitely do if I was going to use this program. But yeah, again, there's no chord tool like there is in Finale to kind of, enter chords one by one. You sort of got to select the beat and then manually input them. The one thing I would say that I really liked is the chords were very responsive. So the program knew what I wanted when I typed them in. In Finale, as anyone who's used it knows, if you don't import the right library, sometimes the chord tool will give you a little bit of trouble. So I did really appreciate that it was, I didn't have to re-enter any chord more than once. All right, so moving on to the second task I gave myself, which was a solo transcription. So something similar in form and length to a jazz lead sheet, but with a little bit more detail and a little bit more intricate, that kind of thing. So like I said in my last video, I chose Paul Desmond's great solo on Samba d'Orfeu by Louis Bonfa off the album with Jim Hall. And overall, I gotta say, it was pretty great to do. It was very responsive. Again, that same sort of auto formatting thing, but if you went too far, it would put on the next page. I really like that. I think that's something that Finale lacks, so it was really nice to see. Overall, it didn't take me that long to do. It was maybe about 30 minutes total. I did a little searching around for a couple things, which I'll talk about in a second, but for the most part, it was pretty easy to kind of format everything the way I wanted. Again, I got to mention that it was incredibly easy to enter semi-complex jazz chords into MuseScore without any backlash from the program at all. All these chords I entered just the way I want to see them. I even typed them in as that, and it kind of made it look a little bit nicer on the screen. No fighting with libraries or anything like that. I do really appreciate that. I think that's amazing. So one thing I really wanted to mention is a big difference from Finale, which is just kind of how you select things, especially measures. So this solo has a lot of 16th note runs and accidentals and some triplets. So I wanted to make sure everything's legible. I had to change every once in a while how many measures would, fit on a system. And in Finale, you could easily kind of select them with your pointer. But in MuseScore, it moves the music around. That was a little bit of a difference. I'm sure there's a way around that. Like I said, if there is, please let me know. But it wasn't too hard to do when I finally figured it out. You have to kind of shift select everything, and then you can change measures per system up here. That's totally fine. It's honestly not too big of a deal, but I was just sort of used to, I kept finding myself trying to drag and drop the different measures and then would pull the music away. So again, a minor change, something that I think you would get used to very easily. Again, as on the lead sheet, it was a little difficult entering the chords one by one using the shortcut. I didn't change the default shortcut. Like I said, if I was going to use MuseScore, that'd be one of the first things I would change. But having to enter all these chords with the Control K shortcut was, a little bit of a pain in the butt, but not anything really that bad, to be honest. So one little thing I noticed while doing this is how ties are treated in MuseScore, which is a little bit different than Finale. I could see some kind of positives to the way it's being done here, but at first it took me by surprise. So you can't just add a tie, or at least, I haven't figured out how to add just the tie just yet. There might be a way, and please let me know if there is. I'm actually very curious. But the default, setting for the ties is to create a note, as you can see here. So now no tie, and you add a tie, and it will actually create the tied note based on which note you have selected up here. I could see how that would be really handy in entering music quickly, but it just took a little bit of getting used to. I found myself having to add the notes and the ties separately, where in Finale I was more used to just pressing the tie key and having a tie and then adding the notes as I went. Again, not a huge deal, but just a little bit of a difference in kind of workflow. That's one thing I noticed. So the one thing I didn't figure out, which I really wanted to know, and again, I was trying to do this without looking anything up. I did look up one thing, which I'll talk about in a second. But one thing I would really like to know, and I know there's a way to do it, I just didn't have time to figure it out, but it's how to just sort of rebar music within a beat or across beats. I did find an option to rebar across bars, which could be useful too, but it'd be just nice to, in Finale, you could press one key and rebar it based on, inside a beat. I'm sure there's a way to do that. There's probably a shortcut that I didn't see, but that was one thing that I really wanted to do but couldn't. All right, on to the final task I gave myself with all these programs, and that was a big band chart, basically a 17, 18 piece, multiple horns, rhythm section, and I wanted to do vocals as well to see how the lyric inputting was. So I chose Brian Setzer's Hoodoo Voodoo Doll, a great song, not the hardest arrangement in the world, but something that takes a little bit of understanding of rhythm and stuff like that. So setting up the chart was pretty easy. In the file menu, new, you can kind of select your instruments. Very, similar to the way Finale does it, which is great. Under the family menu here, common basically had everything I needed except one thing, which I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, picking all the different, brass, trumpets. One little thing I noticed is I like this order thing. It'll give you kind of common orders of these instruments. I do have my own way I like to do it, which I think is a little different than the way they like to do it. But it wasn't too hard to discover that by choosing, jazz combo, you would get kind of a different arrangement. I ended up going with a custom one just to get the vocals where I wanted to. But I really like this idea of being able to choose between an orchestral arrangement and a jazz arrangement. That's an excellent idea. All right, so here's the final result. I think it looks really great. I did about 16 bars, like an intro and a verse, that kind of thing. Overall, it was pretty intuitive, pretty easy to use. I was very impressed, actually. Again, I really like the sort of auto formatting thing. It really helps me get it the way I want it to look. I did find I had too many staffs and had to dig around a little bit, and I found the page settings submenu and was able to adjust the staff spacing, which honestly is kind of similar to Finale, which I do appreciate. It was easy to find and easy to adjust until it looked the way I wanted to. One thing I noticed in MuseScore that's a lot different than Finale, though, is how selecting and dragging is treated. So by default in Finale, if you were to do this, take this staff here and drag it down here, it would just copy one to the other. But in MuseScore, it just erases. It's more of a cut and copy kind of situation. That's a really minor thing, and if you hold Alt, it'll discover it would do the exact same thing. Just a little bit of a difference in workflow, but not anything too severe in my opinion. So as I mentioned, there was only one thing in MuseScore that I had to look up, and that was dealing with the piano score. So just for simplicity's sake, I wanted to have a single staff. By default, it gave me both staffs, and that for the life of me, I could not figure out how to get rid of that bass clef. So after looking around a bit, I found the layout pane, and I did find this, but for some reason, I'm not sure why, I'm sure there's a reason for it, I was unable to kind of turn off just the bass clef. I figured if I clicked, this eyeball, the bass clef would go away, and the treble clef would go away. That's not how it is. I did some searching online to find out how. I didn't get a lot of good answers, but over just a little bit of trial and error, I was able to figure it out. And to be quite honest, I don't know how. It just sort of happened. So if there is some rhyme or reason to that, please let me know. I'd really like to know. It was a really minor issue, but eventually I was able to figure it out, and I haven't been able to duplicate it. So that was the only thing that truly stumped me. One thing I do really like, though, is the way that the drum kit is treated. I think this is really, really awesome. Just having it as an actual drum set with different sounds that you can kind of enter one at a time. I think that's very, very cool. A little bit different than the way Finale does it, but I actually do appreciate it. It took me a little while to get used to it, but once I had things going, it was really nice to hear. And the drums sound really good by default as well. Now, finally, as for the vocals, or specifically the lyrics, I found it pretty intuitive. Again, very similar to the way Finale does it. I discovered this sort of add button up here that allows you to enter text. And if you use lyrics, you can add even more than one set of lyrics, which is really great. And just sort of like Finale, by pressing sideways, you can kind of go from syllable to syllable. I think excellent. Didn't take me long to figure out. Very intuitive. Excellent job, just in general. So yeah, that's MuseScore, and I gotta say, I'm really impressed. I mean, it was a joy to use. It was very intuitive, very logical, seems very scalable and adaptable as well. A little bit of hunting here and there for things that you might need that are a little more specific, but I'm sure nothing you couldn't learn with a little bit more time with the program. The team that made this clearly knows what they're doing and what people want from a program like this. So I give it a solid 9 out of 10. I'm kind of blown away, to be honest. And I gotta say, if every other program on this list is this good, this is gonna be a real hard choice to make. But I do hope it is that way, because that's the way it should be. I mean, anyways, thanks for watching and join me next time.